Welcome back to this sitting up where before the break, the Senate was debating the Drugs Prevention of Misuse Amendment Bill, which in essence allows for individual to have in their possession, of course, for personal use, 30 grams of cannabis without contravening the law or being liable to be charged and so forth. The House did remind individuals that despite this bill, that individuals were not to be smoking in public as it's for private use, personal consumption, and so forth. So when the Senate resumes, they would be continuing with that bill. Also on the agenda today is the Consumer Protection Amendment Bill that will be presented later on. So we await the resumption of the sitting, which will be taking place shortly as individuals are making their way back into the chamber. And once again, the bill they would be continuing with the debate on is the Drugs Prevention Use Amendment Act. We saw that act also being debated in the lower house, and the Prime Minister, Honorable Philip J. Pierre, presented that and indicated this would be a step towards the establishment of a cannabis industry. He also indicated that bill will aid in the public education aspect of things. The bill allows for individuals, adults, that is 18 and older, to have the cannabis for consumption, but not for children. And that was emphasized here as well in the upper house. And we see now the President of the Senate is arriving, and so the sitting will resume now.
Senators, I believe when we rose earlier, Senator Shari had just concluded her presentation. So at this point in time, Leader of Opposition Business, it is your opportunity for rebuttal.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I will attempt in my brief rebuttal to address some of the salient concerns and pertinent questions raised during the course of the morning's debate on this bill by the opposition, the independent side, and even to add value to some of the contributions made by some of the members on the government side. Before I do so, Mr. President, I just wanted to assist the Leader of Opposition Business, as he claimed to have been very confused by many things, including not being sure of the length of time that the government has been in office. Well, Mr. President, I will just say to him, he just has to check the amount of time that he has been in opposition, and it will coincide with the amount of time that this government had been in office, and so I think that should take care of his confusion. I also wish to remind him that, Mr. President, that I think I heard him refer to himself as being tourism. He's tourism, or he was tourism. He's or was, I'm not sure. But what I can say to the Honorable House is that he is Senator Fedi. This is who he is. And I will refer to him as such. Mr. President, on to some of the observations that were made by honorable members of this House. I think there were some valid arguments regarding perhaps some of the areas that we can improve in this bill. I think one of the areas we all agreed on was that there was need for education. I think that point was made across the board, and that we all, both government, opposition, and as well the independent senator, alluded to the need for education as we proceed with this piece of legislation. I concur, and I thank them for making that observation. I think there was a reference made to the issue of cultivation and the issue of where persons are going to get the marijuana from. Senator Polius quite eloquently started the conversation on that, and I think a few other members alluded to it. I wish to remind the House or the Senate that government has made it clear that we are in the process of developing this whole cannabis industry concept. And this is one step in several others that will be taken. And so I can assure them that we will be returning to this Honorable House and this Honorable Senate very soon to do just that. So I acknowledge the concern. I think it's legitimate, but I want to remind them that this is so. There was also reference made to perhaps the wrong motive for taking this bill to the Senate or to the House. Mr. President, if I can borrow from the comments made by Senator Polius, suggesting that it may be to satisfy a specific sector. I will hasten to remind this House, especially the opposition, that the Labour Party government is not in the business of satisfying any one sector. We are inclusive, and we need to involve all sectors. We are not into the business of friends or any F or any other thing like that. We believe in the holistic progress of everybody, and so that does not apply to us. It does not apply to this government. We are not in the business of satisfying any one sector. So I assure Senator Polius that we will continue to involve all the various sectors, and the intention of this bill outside of the Rastafarian community is meant to benefit all the sectors that have a stake or interest in the marijuana industry. Mr. President, I think it was clear from the debate that there was an argument about how we approach the bill, and that it was rushed perhaps, and the approach may not have been proper. I want to reassure the Honourable Senate that we on this side, and St. Lucians in general, I believe, do not feel that we need to be rushed into this. This is why we came for first reading. We are back to amend. And as Senator Senator Shallery, pardon me, I know a little bit more about her than most. I think she was Tuse before Shallery, yes. She did mention the issue of possibly having to return to the House to make more amendments, and that is true. So there is no rush, there is no vitae, there is no panic for us to have to move too quickly with any of the amendments. We will definitely not rush, Mr. President, like the previous government did. This is not DSH. C'est pas DSH. 3 semaines après le gouvernement, nous ne pouvons pas aller signer pièce agreement, nous ne pouvons pas aller faire pièce course avec législation. We are taking our time, and we are taking it step by step. There is no rush, there is no recklessness in that regard. Mr. President, I think Senator Lee raised a very important point, and he made an observation regarding the Rastafarian interest that needs to be taken into account as a priority going forward. I believe that this is true, and this government will endeavor to ensure that there is a comprehensive policy the development of the cannabis industry, and the Rastafarian interests will be at the forefront of our priority list. I also need to pay attention to one of the points that was raised by almost everyone with regard to protect local industry. I think Senator, the leader of opposition business, spent some time discussing that. It's one of the few issues that he raised that I wish to comment on. I believe that it's true that our local industry, our local farmers must consideration. Mr. President, I want to assure this Honorable Senate that it is not in the DNA of the St. Lucia Labour Party to allow foreign interest to supersede or to take precedence over local interests. That is not in our DNA. And I want to be very clear that it is part of the reason why our motto, our slogan in the last campaign was putting you first. And the you to are our St. Lucians, our people. And so any initiative we take, any piece of legislation we're going to pass, any activity undertaken by this government, rest assured, St. Lucians, that it will not put any foreign interest, any foreign commercial or any other interest ahead of the interest of the local industry, the local people of this country. So I want to make sure that this is very well understood and we are all on the same page. Mr. President, I think there was also some explanations provided by our former Minister for Health, who unfortunately is not in the House now. But I wanted to reiterate that it is very important for us to note for the discussion that while we come here to make the amendments, there are other systems that already exist that can support some of the amendments that we are making. And I think the Honorable Senator, former Minister for Health, did make reference to some of them, including mental wellness, counseling, research, education, and a number of other institutions and support services that will help make this amendment and this bill work. Mr. President, I think it's important also to explain or to emphasize that legislation does not exist in a vacuum. And every time you amend or you introduce legislation, there are always going to be implications. And why we will have to return to the House to continue to develop this concept. We have not taken it for granted that the legislation will just work like magic. We know that. And we are prepared to embrace suggestions that are being made. I hope by now that the senator, if she comes into contact with the young man she referred to, who said that he was going to vote only if marijuana was legalized. I must tell you, Mr. President, I came into contact with young people, both male and female, during the campaign, who said the same to me, that unless we legalize the herb, they ain't going to vote. And so there are a number of, a wide cross-section of people in this country who have a serious issue with legalization, let alone decriminalization of marijuana. So I am hoping by now that when she meets that young man, she probably will get a better response from him, and Babano will be in better hands. Mr. President, I want to challenge the senator to perhaps return to the current Prime Minister with the intention that she had regarding the diabetes research center that she referred to. I think it is now an opportunity for this government to embark upon rescuing that project that was abandoned by the previous administration. So I will call upon her to lead the charge in that regard. As a former Minister of Health, as someone who was passionate about the project, I think it will help towards the overall development and research of cannabis and any other related issue that can lend support to our quest to eliminate diabetes and other health-related problems. Finally, Mr. President, I want to reiterate on an issue that was raised regarding a database center that was supposed to have been led by the Labour Party, but when the UWP came in, it was stopped. Just like it was done for the St. Jude Hospital. Some of those projects, had they continued, could have probably put us in a better place to provide services that will support legislation like what we bring to this House. So yes, the opposition has highlighted some of the issues, as well as the independent senator. We acknowledge that. We believe that there is room for improvement. We will continue to work, and we will be back this Honorable House very soon to continue to develop legislation, to develop a wider, broader concept framework for the industrialization, for the commercialization, for all the other aspects that relate to cannabis in this country. But this is our first attempt, and we will not be irresponsible. We will not try to put everything in one basket and create the mess that we have seen when governments do so. I want to thank the members for their observations and their contributions, Mr. President, and I ask once again for this bill to be given the support and to be able to accede to the Governor General for approval. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senators, the question is that the Drugs Prevention and Misuse Amendment Bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many as are of this opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to amend the Drug Prevention of Misuse Act, Cap 3.02.
Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Aye. Clause 3.
Amendment of Section 8.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill. Aye. Clause 4.
Insertion of new Section 8A.
Clause 4 stands part of the bill. Clause 5.
Insertion of new Section 14A.
Right. Good.
President.
Clause 5, you have some amendments.
See here in
Part 6. Look at Part 6. You want to read the amendments?
Proposing the insertion of line 4 to delete the word offenders and replace with the word person on page 6. And clause 514A also to delete the word offender wherever it may appear in the paragraph and replace it with the word person.
Clause 5 stands part of the bill as amended. Clause 6.
Insertion of new Section 27A.
Clause 6. Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Senators, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. Now put the question. As many as are of this opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Senators, I beg to report that the Drugs Prevention and Misuse Amendment Bill went through committee stage with amendments. Leader of Government Business.
Mr. President, I move for the report of the committee to be adopted and the bill be read a third time and passed.
Senators, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and the Drugs Prevention and Misuse Amendment Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put the question. As many as are of this opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, Ben, with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited the Drug Prevention of Misuse Amendment Act 2021.
Leader of Government Business.
Mr. President, I beg to present for first reading a bill shortly entitled Consumer Protection Amendment.
Consumer Protection Amendment.
Mr. President, I beg to move for the suspension of Standing Order 49-2 to allow the bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Senators, the question is that Standing Order 49-2 be suspended in order to allow the Honourable Leader of Government Business to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put the question. As many as are of this opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted. You may proceed, Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I beg to present a second reading of Consumer Protection Amendment. Before I proceed to explain the various amendments, Mr. President, I want to put on record the gratitude of this government for the Department of Commerce, Consumer Affairs, and all the stakeholders who have worked on this bill from its inception, all the way back, I think, about 24 years ago, and thank them for their diligence and their persistence. And today, I'm very happy that we can come to this honorable House and finally pass this bill. Mr. President, around 1997, the process for the enactment of the domestic consumer protection legislation commenced with a view to developing such a regime in St. Lucia. And in that year, or in the year 2015, after about 15 years of consultation, Mr. President, the Consumer Protection Bill has its first reading before Parliament. at that time, and was being passed in January 2016 as Act number 9 of 2016. At that time, Mr. President, with jubilation, with fanfare, St. Lucia proclaimed itself as the first in the OECS to pass such legislation. However, Mr. President, it was unfortunate that to date, the Consumer Protection Bill, or the Consumer Protection Act, has not been given a commencement date. And as such, the entities created thereby, and more importantly, the rights and the processes afforded by that bill have not been realized. Mr. President, there are a number of issues and concerns raised by numerous stakeholders who felt that it was insufficient to delay the enactment, but sufficient to give them an opportunity to meet and to address the concerns subsequent to the enactment. And again, that is part of the process that our government has always put forward, consultation. So, Mr. President, the Act languished and in obscurity from 2016 up until when we proposed to submit it. So, Mr. President, it has been 36 long years. I thought it was 24, but I'm reminded it is 36 long years since St. Lucia signed on to the UN resolution. And that was well before that bill was born, so to speak. So we have signed on to certain resolutions that cause us to have to enact certain legislation to support the decisions that we've made. And for 24 years, we as a nation had commenced the process of developing this act. And 5 long years since we enacted the Consumer Protection Act, but failed to issue a commencement date. This wait, Mr. President, is going to end, or should end, today. Now, Mr. President, as with any other piece of legislation, there would have been deficiencies. And so I will seek to point out some of the deficiencies in this current act. The current act of 2016, and by extension the regime that comes with it, is deficient. And let me just point out some of them. 1, the current act fails to adequately address the functions of the Consumer Affairs Department in the process. Outside of indicating that the department shall receive complaints and investigation, and to investigate them, Mr. President, the Act provides little guidance on how the Consumer Affairs Department, which is responsible for consumer protection, how it fits the consumer protection regime. Secondly, Mr. President, the current Act duplicates powers of investigation, and both the board and the department under parts 1 and 2 of the Act have the power to investigate the same case. This can lead to confusion and either a failure of each entity to duly investigate or a duplication of effort when dealing with a complaint. Further, Mr. President, the Act vests the duties of investigation and deliberation in the board. Now, this goes contrary to the principles of natural justice, and it empowers the board of the consumer protection upon receiving or receipt of a complaint to go out and investigate, and then to deliberate on the issue to arrive at a decision. Mr. President, fourthly, there existed concerns that the members of the entities forming part of the process may be called upon to consider intricate legal issues with wide-reaching ramifications. Mr. President, the only means of appeal in the process and final point of determination was to an appeals tribunal with a cabinet-appointed attorney and not a court-appointed judicial officer. I'll repeat that. It was being done by a tribunal with a cabinet-appointed attorney and not by a court-appointed judicial officer. So, Mr. President, in keeping with our government's promise to look after the best interest of the people of St. Lucia, and of course, putting our people first, we have aligned the policies and legislation of this country with the evolving global rights and best practices, the best practices I speak about all the time. We must address these deficiencies and provide the people of St. Lucia a mechanism with which they evenly balance the interests of all parties while finally falling in line with the recommendations of the UN and on consumer rights. Now, Mr. President, I have outlined some of the weaknesses in the existing legislation. And so let me attempt now to make a few suggestions regarding remedial measures. One, we need to revise the licensing regime. Mr. President, it is with much pleasure that I stand in this honorable House and present this Consumer Protection Amendment Bill, which is streamlined in the administrative aspects and processes relating to consumer protection, complaints, the result investigations, and hearings. Now, in order to adequately do so, Mr. President, the bill essentially replaces the first three parts of the Consumer Protection Act. And in Part 1, the bill addresses the Consumer Affairs Department. In Section 6, Mr. President, the functions of the department are provided as receiving complaint, investigating complaint, reporting, researching, and very importantly, educating the public and promoting the matter of consumer protection and consumer interest. Now, in order to meet the functions that I described, Mr. President, the department is adequately empowered by Section 7 of the bill. Now, in Section 13, it specifically empowers the authorized officers to engage in acts required for the investigation of complaints in Section 17. Now, in Section 17, it requires that a report be prepared upon completion of the investigation. Mr. President, in the interest of full transparency, Section 18 mandates that the report be furnished on all parties, and that includes the complaining consumer, the responding supplier, as well as the officiating counsel. So all three parties are treated fairly. Mr. President, it would be remiss on me if I did not indicate that the bill seeks to ensure that all of the actions of the offers pursuant to this bill are done with the appreciation of civil rights and liberties of all persons involved. Mr. President, the relevant permission by way of warrant shall be obtained in all required instances pursuant to Section 15 of this bill. Now, in Part 2 of the bill, Mr. President, I want to touch now on the council. Now, this entity is created at Section 21 of the bill and replaces the Consumer Protection Board of the Act of 2016. In Section 22, Mr. President, it provides that the council shall benefit from representatives of the St. Lucia Bar Association. I think my independent senator would be interested in that. At the St. Lucia Chamber of Commerce, the National Consumer Association, and other adequately and experienced persons. Mr. President, this Consumer Protection Council, as provided by Section 25 of the bill, shall consider reports and, in keeping with the new international thrust towards mediation, shall attempt to facilitate discourse and agreement through alternative dispute resolution processes. Mr. President, in order to do so, the Council benefits from powers conferred at Section 26 to require the attendance of parties, request further investigation by the Department, and develop agreements for the execution of the parties, or, if unable to settle, they can refer the matter to the Consumer Protection Tribunal. Mr. President, in protecting the rights of consumers, they are expected to act responsibly and in good faith. For this reason, I refer to Section 39, which empowers the council to reject a complaint that it receives or that it perceives to be either frivolous, vexatious, or not in good faith. And I think that is critical. And in this section, it also allows the council to reject complaints that is more than 6 months after the grounds for the complaint arose, as to ensure that the regime does not unduly disadvantage who? The suppliers. So the interests of all parties are being considered. Mr. President, Part 3 of the bill concerns the Consumer Affairs Tribunal. The tribunal is established at Section 48 with its composition outlined in Section 49. Mr. President, the tribunal shall comprise 3 members, 2 of whom hold expertise in industry, public administration, or consumer protection, 1 of whom is an attorney of at least 10 years' experience, and again, that should interest my independent colleague. And Mr. President, ratification of agreements reached at the council level and consideration of matters referred to it by the council are among the main functions of the tribunal outlined in Section 50. And of course, Mr. President, Section 51 duly empowers the tribunal to act as is required to meet those functions. Most importantly, Mr. President, parties are afforded the option to appeal to the civil commercial court if unsatisfied. Under the Consumer Protection Amendment Act 2021, Mr. President, the introduction of this framework, which is a new framework, within 2 months of our government's assumption into office, is testament to the St. Lucia Labour Party government's commitment to protecting the rights of our people and putting them first. Mr. President, we are all consumers, all of us, and somehow we will all benefit from the amendments and the commencement of the Consumer Protection Act. I believe, Mr. President, that this act will create an enabling environment within which both consumers and businesses can function at a high level of certainty and move forward with confidence. And so, Mr. President, I present this bill with the amendments proposed for the approval of this Honorable Senate at the sitting. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senators, the question is that the Consumer Protection Amendment Bill be read a second time. I now put the question, as many as are Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Clause 3.
Amendment of Section 2.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill.
Clause 3, I think
Yeah,
there were some
sorry.
proposed amendments. Yes. In clause 3A, at line 3, we're proposing to delete words main complaints and investigation officer or assistant and replace these words with has the meaning assigned. Also, the paragraph should read authorized officer, still in clause 3A, has the meaning assigned distribution of price and price of goods Act Cap 1309.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill as amended. Clause 4.
Amendment of Section 4.
Clause 4 stands part of the bill. Clause 5.
Substitution of Part 1.
Clause 5 stands part of the bill. Clause 6.
Substitution of Part 2.
Clause 6 stands part of the bill. Clause 7.
Substitution of Part 3.
Clause 7 stands part of the bill. Clause 8.
Amendment of Section 62.
Clause 8 stands part of the bill. Clause 9.
Amendment of 6.
Clause 9 stands part of the bill. Clause 10.
Amendment of Section 126.
Clause 10 stands part of the bill. Clause 11.
Amendment of Part 9.
Clause 11 stands part of the bill. Clause 12.
Amendment of Part 12.
Clause 12 stands part of the bill. Clause 13.
Substitution of Schedules 2, 3, and 4.
Clause 13 stands part of the bill. Clause 14.
Insertion of new Schedule 5.
Mr. President, under clause 14, it's proposed that in line after number 13, that delete number 1 and place the number 3. And it should then read under section 13.3E.
14 stands part of the bill as amended. Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of. Senators, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put the question. As many as are of this opinion say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion say no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Senators, I beg to report that the Consumer Protection Amendment Bill went through committee stage with amendments. Leader of Government Business.
Mr. President, I move that the report of the committee adopted and that the bill be read a third time and passed.
Senators, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and that the Consumer Protection Amendment Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put the question. As are of this opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the Consumer Protection Amendment Act 2021.
Leader of Government Business.
Mr. President, I move that the Senate do stand adjourned, sine die.
Senators, the question is this, is that this Senate do stand adjourned, sine die. I now put the question, as many as are of this opinion say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The sitting of the Senate is adjourned.
All right.
Thank you once again for staying with the broadcast. Today's sitting of the Senate for the debate and approval of two bills, namely Drugs Prevention and Misuse Amendment Bill and the Consumer Protection Amendment Bill. As it relates to the Drug Prevention of Misuse Amendment Bill, the amendment to Section 8 of this Act, this is the restriction of possession of controlled drugs. It was amended in Clause 3 of the bill so as to allow for the quantity of cannabis or cannabis resin that is considered to be possession to be changed from 15 to 30 grams. So individuals who are found are now allowed to have 30 grams of cannabis in their possession. Further to that, Clause 4 of the bill was amendments so as to provide for an exemption from criminal liability for possession of less than 30 grams. An amendment to Clause 5 of the bill makes provision for the treatment and the programs for a child or young person, and just to emphasize that it was indicated that this act, this amendment, applied to adults and not children. And so that amendment to this act allowed for treatment programs for young people who may have, may be using or may have been affected by the use of cannabis. But this is not for children, and it's for adults. And moving on to Clause 6, this saw the insertion of a new section to provide for a restriction on smoking of cannabis in public places. And like I mentioned earlier, it was also reiterated that the allowance of the 30 grams of cannabis for personal use is for adults only and not for individuals under the age of 18. Moving on to the Consumer Protection Amendment Bill, Leader of Government Business, Honorable Gideon Ferdinand, indicated that there were deficiencies within that act where it fails to address the functions of the Consumer Affairs Department as opposed to the board, as well as the powers of investigation as it relates to the two entities, that is the department and the board, were not clearly spelled out, which could result in a duplication of efforts. So these were some of the deficiencies, and the amendments would address these deficiencies. The powers given to the department, Consumer Affairs Department, include receiving reports, investigating, reporting, and educating the public as to their rights as it relates to consumer affairs. Also to allow officers to partake in acts associated with this investigation. For transparency and fairness, it was indicated that the act would require both all parties, that is consumers, suppliers, the council and the department or the department, to prepare reports on the reported transgression. The council replaces the Consumer Protection Board, and the bill spells out its responsibilities and its functions. And the council would be made up of representatives who have experience in the various processes of the reporting, investigation, and education process, and that would be entities such as the Chamber of Commerce, the Bar Association, and other relevant entities. And as mentioned, the bill does speak to the construct, the structure, and the formation of that new council, and spells out its roles and responsibilities so as to differentiate between the Consumer Affairs Department and the Council who does what to prevent that duplication. So these once again the two bills up for debate and was passed at the sitting of Senate today. That was the Drug Prevention of Misuse Amendment Bill and the Consumer Protection Amendment Bill. Once again, thank you for joining us for the broadcast. Till next time, have a great day.